Walid Phares, who is foreign policy advisor to the Trump presidential campaign. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Paul.
Thanks for being with us. How does Donald Trump see the world and the role of America in the world?
Well, as we all heard from his speeches, especially the last speeches this last week, he wants to see, first of all, an America that is strengthened, that is reorganized in terms of identifying where the threat is coming, but where the friends are as well. And of course, he would want to engage in the track of forming coalitions, regional coalitions, that partnership with them. So he doesn't want to see America being involved in every single case alone. He wanted to be with coalitions. And of course, the last point is to have a consensus by the American public if we want to intervene or not intervene. So there will be no principle of isolationism or interventionism, but first of all, to make sure that we are consulting the American public on these issues.
How did you get involved in the Trump campaign?
Well, I was involved in the Romney campaign back in 2011, 2012. We had that experience, and a number of Republican candidates called on the previous experts of the last cycle, and that's how I met Mr. Trump. And we had a long discussion, but then he called on me only in March of this year to serve as a foreign policy advisor.
I'll put the phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for our guest, Walid Phares, one of the Trump foreign policy advisors, and we'll take your calls in just a couple of moments. Our last guest said there's not a lot of detail in Donald Trump's foreign policy. Let's start by talking about ISIS. What has Donald Trump said about his plans to defeat ISIS?
Actually, may I begin by saying there are more details, I wouldn't say even details, I'd say general directions, specific general directions in Mr. Trump's approach to defeating ISIS than in Secretary Clinton's, which remained a little bit abstract and said we're going to continue more of the same. But going back to Mr. Trump, basically the most important point is to end ISIS as an organization, not just as it is right now, but end it as a future organization, meaning fighting the ideological fight as well. As important on the ground, what is key in the fight against ISIS is not just the military defeat of ISIS, Mosul, Raqqa, other places, but it's who's going to take over after ISIS. Because ISIS came as a result of a mistake made the way we left Iraq in 2011, whereby we had defeated Al-Qaeda. But because of the political equation between Sunni and Shia in Iraq, ISIS was able to come back. So thinking of post-ISIS is as important as thinking about how we're going to dismantle ISIS.
He spoke on Monday, Donald Trump did, about immigrants and refugees, talked about new screening methods. Here's a look at what he had to say.
We should only admit into this country those who share our values and respect our people. In the Cold War, we had an ideological screening test. The time is overdue to develop a new screening test for the threats we face today. I call it extreme vetting. I call it extreme vetting. Our country has enough problems. We don't need more, and these are problems like we've never had before. In addition to screening out all members of the sympathizers of terrorist groups, we must also screen out any who have hostile attitudes toward our country or its principles, or who believe that Sharia law should supplant American law. Those who do not believe in our Constitution or who support bigotry and hatred will not be admitted for immigration into our country.
Walid Phares, what does extreme vetting mean?
Extreme vetting means real vetting and making sure that the persons who are coming here are, one, not connected to, in this case, jihadist organization, but any other organization that is radical terrorist and aiming at the United States, versus little vetting or light vetting. And let me explain what are the 3 points that are important. Individuals coming to the United States to apply for immigration status, that is when we don't have a war in certain areas of the world or conflict. What is important are 2 things, and I've been for 22 years expert in immigration cases, so I defended the immigrants when they came and had political asylum cases across the nation. If you have a population that has been pushed out of a country, then you have a special case. So where we should begin as a Trump administration is to see if we can solve the issue before they leave. That's where the problem is right now. In Syria, let's take that case. There's a whole area in Syria, in the northeastern part of Syria, known as Al-Hasaka, that can absorb millions of Syrian refugees. And if you ask the children, and many have asked them, where would you rather go? They say home. So one policy would be to make sure that we can have these safe places for the Syrian immigrant. And second, the other policy would be to make sure that at the end of the day, no jihadists will come. It's not really about Muslims. It's not really about Arabs and Syrians. It's about we're going to detect the jihadists. And the Arab countries themselves have a lot to teach us on this issue.
First call, Raymond, Dayton, Ohio, Democrat for Walid Phares, a Donald Trump foreign policy advisor. Hi, Raymond.
Hi. Yeah, I just had a couple comments. I spent 18 months in Turkey back when President Kennedy was killed, and I couldn't have enjoyed it anymore. They were wonderful people. And then Jimmy Carter had the hostages, and his whole life was spent in the military. And Reagan comes in, and he and Casey work some quid pro quo and get it all resolved in 24 hours. Whatever happened there? I asked Karl Rove that at a book signing here in Dayton, and he didn't have any answer. He didn't know either. So, you know, what goes on behind these doors, it's like Cheney and Mr. Trump himself. They never served. I want people who've served in our military. I can't stand this. Reagan never served. Granted, Mr. Obama and Mr. Clinton didn't serve. It's time to end that. There should be some kind of law that requires they've served. They don't have a clue. The stuff they come up with. I mean, Mr. Trump, his comments about our military, our heroes, it's unbelievable that anybody would consider this man for president. It just cannot stand. I'm sorry. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for calling, Raymond. Mr. Phares.
Well, I understand where he's coming from. Of course, all patriots, all U.S. citizens would like to see their commander-in-chief actually have experienced either battlefield or service in any form or shape. And not all of our presidents have actually had that privilege to do so. But what will compensate, basically, and he named a number of presidents who did not serve, is the fact that they are well advised, is the fact that they have served in the private sector or in a public sector in a sense that would make them available for advice, and especially from military, not just in the agencies now in the executive, but also those who have served before. So I hope that we will be able in the future to have more exposure to candidates to the issues of defense.
Howard, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, independent caller. Hi, Howard.
Hi. I'm not really a political person, never have been, but, you know, problems have been arising this last year that has drawn me into it knee deep and crap. And I do believe that Trump, with all the options that we have, Trump is the only option that we do have, because he really does want to put America first. I believe in helping anybody. I believe that if you're in another country and it's bad there and you want a better life, by all means, yes. I open the door and the border to that person to come over to better their life. But I do not welcome that person to come over here and start trying to change the way we live to the way they live and make that laws. And we have so many problems and so many people from other countries in our Congress and in our whole development all the way up to the president. You know what I'm saying? There's too many people trying to change the way we live. Donald Trump, I believe, is on the right track to put America back to the way it's supposed to be. I don't know, but I think I'm right.
All right, that was Howard from Florida. Mr. Phares, let me talk about some of the critique of Donald Trump that's out there. One of the major headlines recently was this letter that 50 or so national security figures have signed. They say he would be a, quote, dangerous president. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I know, if not all, but most of the signing parties. I've worked with some of them. Some of them I also, looked at their books and research. So we are from the same circle. Of course, they have a different view of Mr. Trump. They consider him as, quote, unquote, dangerous because he's not going to apply their political analysis and principle, because they have not said about their opponent, Mrs. Clinton, that she's dangerous. So this is a little bit unusual to use that term. But basically, I think when he will start acting as a president, as a chief diplomat, or as a chief executive, then I would anticipate that many among them who I know well, and I know what their agenda is and what their thinking is when it comes to the practical issues in the region. Should it be even, with the most difficult issue of Russia or North Africa or the Middle East, let alone East Asia, then they will come along, in my view.
Hillary Clinton has said that Mr. Trump is soft on Russia. What's your reaction to that?
No, I think that she was soft because she went with that key, if you recall, when
the reset button.
The reset button. And after that, Russia was expanding mostly under her, and then, of course, after she left the State Department. But let me talk more about Mr. Trump's vision of Russia, because there's a lot of fog about the issue. He is not about cutting a deal with Mr. Putin around the world. This is not a new Yalta that many critics are talking about. He's about being clear with the Russian leadership as to where are national interests of the United States. Be clear that there are areas where we can cooperate, and those areas, Mr. President Obama and Secretary Clinton have spoken about them. They tried actually to go to Russia and deal with those issues, such as fighting the jihadists, such as fighting the terrorists, such as all the internet problem that we're having. But you have to have a strong leadership here, perceived by Russia as strong, perceived by Russia as determined. When you put a red line in Syria, and then you stop, what it means for the Russian leadership, if indeed it is an expansionist leadership, is they would see us as weak. So this will have to change under a Trump presidency.
Donald Trump received his first national security briefing this week. What does that mean to a candidate at this stage of the race? And will that briefing and others like it impact his policies moving forward?
Any briefing will impact any candidate's policies, including the incumbent, helping the Secretary Clinton, who will continue with that policy. These are very important ones because they will give the candidate reality on the ground, the facts on the ground upon which he could shape his own policy. And remember that same day he met with his National Security Council, most of his advisors at least. So he is going in a direction of getting ready to be in the White House.
Back to calls. Dave, Parrott, Georgia, Republican caller for Walid Phares. Good morning.
Good morning.
Dave, can you hit the mute button on your TV, please?
Yeah, I got it cut down.
We'll be able to hear you much better.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave. Go ahead, please.
I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton for dog catcher because she's done so many things that's terrible. That's harmed the people in this country. It's going to keep harming them for years and years, and you couldn't have done no more dirty work than to kill Gaddafi over there, what she had done over in Libya, and then she unseated Libya over there, made it a thing, and she got thousands and thousands of folks killed. That's the reason I'd vote for Donald Trump. He's a man of his word. He ain't got a lie. He tells the truth.
Thanks for calling, Dave. On to Mary in Waynesville, North Carolina. Mary's a Democratic caller. Hi, Mary.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have some questions, not comments. I don't see any point in allowing people to continue to disseminate disinformation. So here's my first question. What is the current vetting policy and law for refugees who want to come into this country to apply for refugee status? Please give a detailed example of how you think the federal law that exists now should be changed. Who changes it? The Senate, the House, the President, what? Who? What country did you come from? What is your religion? When did you come to this country? Would you have been allowed into this country? And please give 3 examples or facts of lies that Hillary Clinton has told that it has affected U.S. foreign policy or domestic policy.
Thanks for the questions, Mary. Why don't you start with yourself and your background, sir?
Born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, came to the United States in December of 1990. So I'm here for 26 years now. I came on several status, married to a U.S. citizen, student, and of course being a professor later at the university. I, as an immigrant, actually have an interesting take on the issue of immigrants because I have served as well, as I said earlier, for 22 years as an expert on political asylum, in trying to help court understand if the case is right, the case is not. That's vetting. So I have 22 years experience in vetting. So to answer, Mary, basically, for political asylum, the vetting process, which is first begins with the administration, with the executive branch. It was used to be the INS, now it's the DHS. They want to make sure that the case is strong, that person, that's the key, that person cannot be in any place in that country they're coming from, and therefore has the right to apply for political asylum. If there is an area of that country with that, and the questions are very, very strong. I've seen it for many, many times. The government would ask, if you go to another area of that country, will you be safe? If you go to a third area, once we conclude, the government concludes that there is no other place, like in Cuba, for example, those who were against the communists, or Vietnam, or during the Soviet Union, these are very clear cases. But when you're coming from an ethnic conflict area or a civil war area, then you're going to determine, make that determination. The government tried to do it, otherwise it will be the defense lawyers.
Bob is calling from Philadelphia, independent caller. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how you doing today?
Doing fine. How about you?
Well, I'm a little bit disturbed about the people not being vetted that are speaking on this show. That first guy from the Center for Progress, American Progress, that whole fund is funded by John Podesta, who's also leading the Hillary campaign. And I had the opportunity to go to their website, and there was nothing on there but slams against Donald Trump. And the same way with Mr. Phares. I looked at his background, and I don't see any political connection to him, which makes him look better to me than the other guy. So I wish that the C-SPAN would just put out who's paying these people who you have on as guests, because it helps form an opinion on how valid their opinions are.
Understood, caller. Any foreign policy or national security questions for our guest, Walid Phares?
Well, I believe that he's correct in that the United States has to be strong. They have to put out that, you know, look, we're not going to take it anymore. This policy of being so nice is not working. We have to find a different way. And I'm an American First guy, and I did serve in the military, and I believe that a strong military prevents this kind of stuff going on around the world. We need a strong leader.
Thanks for calling, Bob. Let's hear more from Hillary Clinton now, Walid Phares. In her national security speech back in June, she talked about Donald Trump's ability to be president. Let's take a look.
He is not just unprepared. He is temperamentally unfit to hold an office that requires knowledge, stability, and immense responsibility. This is not someone who should ever have the nuclear codes, because it's not hard to imagine Donald Trump leading us into a war just because somebody got under his very thin skin. We cannot put the security of our children and grandchildren in Donald Trump's hands. We cannot let him roll the dice with America. This is a man who said that more countries should have nuclear weapons, including Saudi Arabia. This is someone who has threatened to abandon our allies in NATO, the countries that work with us to root out terrorists abroad before they strike us at home.
Sharp critique there, Walid Phares. What's your reaction?
Very sharp. We heard it before. These are following points. Number one, the preparedness of an American national politician before they enter the fray of public policy. Mrs. Clinton, first stage was she was the wife of a governor, then the first lady. So let's compare that stage with Mr. Trump, who was the head, the CEO of a multinational corporation and in contact with many leaders, many public figures around the world. President Obama, before being a senator, was more of a local politician, not with a lot of international connection. We would judge on one thing, which is the speeches that they are delivering now, worked by many advisors and teams, and of course when they will practice. That's the problem. If you are an incumbent, if you have served, you're going to claim that you have more experience versus the person who have not served before. I think that the voter would decide. But beyond that, what Mrs. Clinton is talking about, that he cannot consider situations as they are. Libya, for example, or Syria will respond to Mr. Trump. She was Secretary of State when these crises began. The handling was a poor handling in the eyes of Mr. Trump.
How about NATO? What has Donald Trump specifically said on NATO? Because he gets knocked a lot of what he has said about NATO, including on this program. What is his official position right now on NATO?
Yes, a lot of things have been said, but very few things have been said correctly. You know, I'm an advisor also to members of the European Parliament. I meet with a lot of European lawmakers. First of all, before Mr. Trump, there is a debate within Europe between the Eastern Europeans, the Central Europeans, the Southern Europeans, and the rest of Europe on actually on NATO. They are very concerned about the huge bureaucracy in Brussels. Some of them are more concerned about the Russian pressure. Others, like the Italians or the Greeks, are concerned about the migrants. Each one is concerned about one issue. So it's not that NATO was perfect, no debate, and Mr. Trump came in. But basically, he does not want to dismantle NATO. He does not want to end NATO. In politics, of course, there are the slogans that he want to end NATO. No. He want to reorganize NATO. He want to negotiate the reorganization of NATO. He want to go actually and address leaders of NATO in Brussels and tell them, first at the financial level, second at the defense level, and thirdly, more important to all of us across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, you have to bring NATO to start helping us against the jihadists in Syria and Libya and elsewhere. These are the principles that Mr. Trump would like to see with regard to NATO.
We go to Seaside, California now. Josh on the line for Democrats for Walid Phares. Josh, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. My question is, wasn't Donald Trump's family named Dunk? The name was changed because of his connection, his family's connection with the Nazi Party during the Hitler's administration when they first came here. Am I correct?
Where have you read that, Josh?
Well, I haven't read it. In fact, it was discussed one time at a meeting that I was at. And they said that the reason that Donald Trump's father changed their name from Dunk to Trump is that he was an officer in Hitler's administration.
Josh, let me ask you to hold a little bit and ask Walid Phares, had you heard that story?
Never. It's a very strange story, but of course we hear any story that is coming from citizens.
Why do you bring it up? Why is it important?
Because of the fact that he is really, really being connected with Russia and some of the ex-communist type of situations that is happening right now within the world. I cannot believe that Trump will be allowed to at least represent the United States with all his characters, references and things of this nature. He is really, really unfit. That's the way I see it. And hopefully that we can find out a little bit about his family background.
Thank you. Anything else you want to say?
Just
please
take advantage of this question to talk about Russia a bit. Looking at those who are advising him in important names such as Mr. Newt Gingrich, Mayor Giuliani, the generals and the admirals who surround them, they were part of this big pushback against the communist threat. So I don't think that would be interested, or the culture of the campaign is one of cutting a deal with Mr. Putin over the heads of our friends and allies.
Rose from Willard, Ohio, Republican caller. Good morning to you, Rose.
Good morning.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, our country is in a mess. And like I said before, I've been a Democrat voter for many, many years. And this time around, I'm going straight Republican. I trust more than what they say than what I do of the Democrats. Having Hillary Clinton as our president, our country will be in a more disaster. Thank you.
Well, I agree with the caller, and I think many other Democrats, independents. It's really not about the party division line. It's a general feeling that over the past 8 years, specifically since the Arab Spring and with what happened in Russia, there's a feeling that the administration, and therefore Mrs. Clinton is going to be a stretch of this administration, is not doing it right in terms of strategic choices. One of the choices, it may have not been mentioned yet, is the Iran deal. That was mentioned by supporters of Mrs. Clinton, that this is one of the best deals that have been engaged in. We have a completely different view. Number one, we should have had our allies in the region part of the deal. When you sit down with a country that is deployed in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, at least you would think you'd consult with the Gulf countries, with Egypt, with Jordan. let alone with Israel and others. So this has to be done again. Many things, many of the directions taken by President Obama needs to be changed, and I think Mr. Trump will do so.
Let's talk about some other parts of the world. Libya. So connecting Libya to ISIS, because we know some bombing has begun, U.S. bombing has begun in Libya. How would Donald Trump handle the situation there?
Number one, quickly, how Libya connects with Syria is very simple. When we backed the so-called rebels in the beginning of the campaign in Libya against Mr. Gaddafi, the mistake was not to prepare the post-Gaddafi. Because what came after Gaddafi are jihadi organizations, some of which we work with assuming that they are Islamists. But these organizations sent weapons and volunteers to Syria. Those became al-Nusra, part of them became ISIS. So that's the chain of events. Now, how to handle Libya? Basically, you're going to look at regional alliances. We have two very strong, close allies to the United States who've had their experience and have their experiences in fighting ISIS. That would be Egypt under President Sisi and their new parliament, and of course Tunisia. We have upgraded Tunisia actually as an associate of NATO. We have the countries of the Sahel with the French. So we need to have a plan for Libya, not just to defeat ISIS, and it's the same model everywhere else. What comes after ISIS? We need to work with civil society, having a democratically elected government, and then partnering with them through regional alliances.
How about Asia? China, North Korea?
That's a very complex issue. I've been speaking to many South Koreans and Japanese, preempting on the questions to come, who have expressed a lot of concerns because they heard many speeches, many statements by Mr. Trump talking about, you have to share more, burden sharing. Reality is, on the strategic level, there is no way the United States is going to quit any of the allies if they are under attack. But we have to prevent that. And one of the ways we're going to prevent them is by fixing that relationship with them. It's like an old car, you have to fix it. But more important, you have to go to China. You have to sit down with China, because China has the key to North Korea. All of what has been done by this administration with North Korea, as South Koreans have told me, did not lead to a more moderate, more restrained North Korea. So we need to change that as well.
Moving on to Greg now in Milwaukee, independent caller for Walid Phares. Mr. Phares is a foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump. Go ahead, Greg.
Good morning, C-SPAN. I just got a quick question here. I was wondering if Syria can become the new United Nations for the Middle East. I know it's a big question, but it's just my thought, and I'll take my answer offline. Thank you.
What he meant could lead to another question, that is, what is the future of Syria? In the sense that now we realize, with the civil war of 5 years, almost 400,000 people killed, that there are areas in Syria where we have a great doubt if they were going to come back to a central authority, complete central authority. Should it be under Assad or no Assad? The Kurds, for example, what will be the future of the Kurds? The Alawites of Syria, what would be their future? And even the Sunnis, are they going to take the path of the Muslim Brotherhood or the path of liberalism? And the smaller minorities, including Christians and Jews. This is a very good question. It needs a lot of architecture only after the civil war is solved.
Has Mr. Trump spoken on the future of Mr. Assad himself?
He did and he did not, in the sense that he doesn't think that now the priority is to lead a military campaign against the Assad regime. But one of the reasons why, first of all, because it's very late. Mr. Obama, President Obama, had the opportunity in 2013 when the chemical weapons were used. Now the Russians are there. Now it would be a confrontation between Russia and the West. So what he's talking about is, number one, taking care of ISIS first, making sure that ISIS is eliminated, making sure that the moderates are back. Should they be the Kurds, Christians, Arab, Sunni moderates? And third, everybody should go under an international auspice to Geneva or to any other capital and then discuss the future of Syria.
Here's a question. Is Donald Trump an isolationist or an interventionist, or are those terms just sort of old
Both they do not apply anymore. Any political scientist will tell you otherwise, is not really a political scientist. Mm-hmm. There is one term that I'm looking at, which is functionalist, and it exists in international relations. Functionalist means in function of American national interest, in function of our alliances, meaning we look at each case and see where can we and how can we deal with that case. So there is no principle of we're going to intervene everywhere we can, or we shouldn't intervene everywhere we shouldn't.
Beside yourself, who else is on Mr. Trump's team, the top team of foreign policy advisors?
I may not give you names, but the names are available in public. He has appointed 5 national security, foreign policy, between generals and people who have served DOD, State Department. And of course, now we have former DIA Commander or Director, Mr. General Flynn, and many others. It's not just they have to be in the military. People who have served, for example, as lawmakers on committees and subcommittees and national security, defense, and Congress are also joining Mr. Trump's campaign.
One more quick question. You advised Mitt Romney in 2012. Of course, Mr. Romney has not only not come out against Mr. Trump, he laid into him quite severely earlier this year. Have you spoken to Governor Romney at all about Mr. Trump?
No, we haven't, but I've spoken with family circles, people very close, joint friends, people with whom I have served under him. Look, when he ran, I supported him with all the strength because we had an intellectual connection. And I hoped, actually, let me say it very clearly, that he would have run again before Mr. Trump. But now that Mr. Trump is the candidate, is the nominee, and I have committed to him, I do support his agenda fully. And part of the agenda that he is pushing now was part of Romney's agenda. The disagreement is political, and I do not intervene in politics.
Let's go to Dorothy. Dorothy's been hanging on patiently in Marietta, Georgia, on the line for Democrats. Hi, Dorothy. Dorothy, you there?
Hello?
Ah, there you are. Go right ahead.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to actually ask a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead.
I want to ask a question. First of all, I want to say that we're, at this time, no one in America is from America, no more than the Indians that was here. And at this time, they're always talking about these foreigners coming in. Who are the ones that are going to be making the laws that people can sit down and actually say that they're coming to the country for harm? And I think that putting Donald Trump with the level head that he have not had throughout the whole time is like putting gasoline on fire. So I don't think that Donald Trump is the answer to everything today, because back in the days, if people really open their eyes, back in the days when Clinton, the husband was in office, I don't think no one can actually disagree that they didn't have a good life at that time. The budget was finally balanced. So what makes Trump, who I think is trying to get a dictatorship in America, the best candidate for America at this time?
Let's hear from our guest. Thanks, Dorothy.
Yeah, I understand the point that she's raising, but I would say it's probably the opposite, because Mr. Trump wants more freedom for individuals, not just political, but also economic. He wants less government. He wants less interventionism in the life of individuals. So I would say he's more for freedoms. And of course, that would clash with ideas of his opponents, who wants to see a greater role to government. But again, this is a debate that has been in existence for many, many years. Mr. Trump is, his essence here is that we want Americans to feel comfortable with each other, comfortable with the government, no suppression coming from government. At the same time, we need to reform economically and politically.
Teresa, Gulf Breeze, Florida, Republican for Walid Phares. Good morning, Teresa.
Good morning. Mr. Phares, you're an excellent communicator, and I've enjoyed the program so far. Thank you for taking my call. I am a woman who is college educated, and I am voting for Donald Trump.
How come?
Because I believe in a smaller government. I believe in a more efficient government. And I think even though nothing has really been progressing, I think we've been regressing in the last 15 years. What's clear is the government is grossly negligent. And as a woman, I have been so concerned about security since 9/11, and to think that our government has allowed millions of illegal immigrants to march into this country after that event is just unheard of. I am a daughter of an immigrant. I am all in favor of legal immigration, and I think it's a very serious threat that we are so negligent, and I worry about my daughters and my granddaughters and how they're going to be, how their safety is going to be. It's very serious, and I know it's complicated, and I think what Mr. Trump does that's so cool is that he says something very outrageous, and we're all talking about it in detail.
Like for NATO, for many years we have heard people are not paying their fair share, and the United States is in debt, $19 trillion, and we're paying all this money, and what to protect everybody. It's got to be fixed, and we have to address it, and we cannot control people's speech. We have to talk about these issues, identify them, and fix them. This is America. We're great. We can do it. Thank you for taking my call.
Thanks, Teresa. Walid Phares, anything to add there?
Just a little thing personal here. As immigrants who actually are part of the public debate, public policy, it's a bit unusual because, you know, you had Mr. Brzezinski, who was National Security Advisor, you had Kissinger, you had many people who came here at a younger age, including secretaries of state and so on and so forth. I look at it simply from three perspectives. Number one, you have the legal immigrant. I was a legal immigrant. I worked very hard to become a citizen, and I engage in the society because I like the society, I like its values. Then you have the illegal immigrants. The illegal immigrants are an issue of socio-economic and humanitarian issues that we need to solve. These are one, and then the other one are those who are trying to penetrate our country using immigration system. I would be concerned about that part, national security perspective, and I think that Mr. Trump is trying to focus on that one.
What do you see as the biggest difference between Mr. Trump and Hillary Clinton in this area of foreign policy?
In foreign policy in general terms is not to look at the map, I look at the real players, make it very abstract. I mean, the Obama-Clinton narrative is very good. It's college level, it's sophisticated. But then when you come and ask them, for example, in Syria or in Libya, or for that matter, for the Iranian deal, what are the alternatives? If it goes wrong, then trust us, we are in government, and then we'll see at the time. Mr. Trump is trying to bring a different school. Now, of course, he'll have to be updated, and going back to your point, the more he gets national security briefings now, hopefully in transition and after, the more he can answer questions. But he is saying there are other alternatives to what you have produced.
Of everything we've talked about so far, what's the biggest national security threat to this country?
I think the greatest national security threat is in ideology. It's not even individuals, it's an ideology. The more this ideology can progress and influence the minds of individuals, the more we are going to be in danger, because that would be the continuation, the growth of homegrown jihadists. But my point here is, you don't fight an ideology just with law enforcement and counterintelligence. You have to fight it with NGOs. Actually, for those who are saying when I shut down piece of the internet to stop what ISIS is doing, I would say that you don't need. You have to put in more reformers, put in more moderates. And Mr. Trump, for the first time this last week, said, I'm going to open my arms to Muslim reformers. This is important.
On to Gaithersburg, Maryland, Democratic caller. Is it Iwaho?
Yawo.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead. Pronounce your name for us, sir.
Yawo, Y-A-W-O, Yawo.
Got it. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. In terms of foreign policy between Donald Trump and Hillary, I think they have the same thing. Trump doesn't have the appropriate way to express himself. He needs to polish a little bit his word, and then he'll be fine. You know, another thing for me, I want to talk to black people. Am I allowed to do that just for a second?
Yes, go ahead, please.
You know, I come from Africa. I'm here because I'll try to do something. My country is not working. That's why I'm here. And I want to thank America for all the things they do to me and my children. For my fellow black American and I think we need, you have to change a little bit, because in French you say something, only stupid people don't change. We can change one time to find out. If it's no good, we come back to our comments or what we love, we think. So me, I think the message Trump sent last time to African Americans to change the vote for him, I think it's fundamental. You have to try that one time. If it doesn't work, we come back to Democrat people. We can do the same thing the same time, and it's not working, we are continuing to do it. That's my point.
You know, he mentioned Africa. Thank you, Yao. He mentioned Africa. It gives me the opportunity to speak a little bit about the continent. Mr. Trump has very much developed strategy with regard to Africa, because many of these conflicts that we see, the worst are going to be in Africa. For example, the forgotten Darfur. We didn't see much from the Obama-Clinton administration work on Darfur. There are other areas within Sudan that deserves a lot of attention. Nubia, the civil war in South Sudan. Somalia is still a problem, even after 8 years, not just 8 years of Obama, 10 years, including the last 2 of the Bush administration. But Nigeria, I mean, if the Boko Haram problem is not addressed, then you're going to have 1/3 of a country that is oil producing, the largest in numbers in Africa, going the way of Syria. And that will be 10 times the size of Syria, let alone, of course, the countries of the Sahel from Mali. So Africa needs to be on the agenda of foreign policy of the next administration, whomever is in the White House.
We have Joe on the line now from Lynn, Massachusetts, independent caller for Mr. Phares. Go ahead, Joe.
Good morning, Walid. I have 2 questions. From the start of the Syrian-Assad regime change policy, one of the underlying scene issues was the gas pipeline from Qatar through Syria into Europe. My questions, what is Trump's policy concerning the wishful pipeline, and will we hear any statement regarding a foreign policy based on oil, natural gas, and the behind-the-scene politics concerning Europe, Russia, and China from the Trump campaign?
Joe, thank you very much for this question. We hear a lot, we read a lot about what we call them pipeline politics. And there's a lot of merit to understand that below these conflicts, below the positioning of many players in the Middle East, including in Syria, Iraq, the Gulf, Russia, of course, with its huge energy, what's happening in Ukraine, has also to do with the passage of oil or other forms of energies, and it is always influential in making decisions. Now, a Trump administration, first of all, will act like an ambulance. First, you have to save the situation and the population from being destroyed, as is the case in Syria and Iraq and in other places. So emphasis will be put on, number one, calming down the situation, resolving these wars. So the future of dictators, or the futures of presidents, the futures of heads of the opposition, this will be negotiated in the conference rooms of international diplomacy. But ending a war, first of all, you have to end the main reason of a war, which is the presence of a terrorist organization, in this case ISIS, but there are other than ISIS. I am concerned, for example, when it comes to Iraq, that those who are replacing ISIS are not necessarily those moderates. When you have Iranian-controlled militias being thrown into Fallujah and now probably into Mosul, this is the recipe for the next war. That's why the next president should be wise enough, while solving one problem, he should be or she should be thinking of the next, and I hope it's going to be a he.
Down to our last couple calls. Daryl from Battle Creek, Michigan, Republican. Good morning, Daryl.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Mr. Phares, I was wondering if you were going to take a position on Mr. Trump's administration. I hope so. I've seen you in a lot of speeches, and I think that you would be very good for his administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now I'm serving very happily as an advisor, and then of course there will be transition, hoping that Mr. Trump will win. He has many talents. Many people in my field should be foreign policy, national security, and he will make the ultimate selection. But thank you for your recommendation.
What is Donald Trump's method each day, each week to pull in all this foreign policy information, the news going on around the world, the challenges, the crises? How does he take it all in? How does he absorb all this and figure out an approach?
Well, this is a great question, because it happened that I lived the previous cycle with the Romney campaign. The world has changed. What we see today did not exist then. It was the beginning of the Arab Spring. There was no much tension with Russia, and even North Korea was not as strong. We didn't have 500,000 people dead in Syria. And we didn't have also this large number of homegrown jihadi attacks in Europe and here. So you're going to imagine that what we call, quote unquote, the war room or the situation room of Mr. Trump, which doesn't have to be in one physical place, it could be a web, is very busy. Briefing him as a president or a prime minister of Great Britain is briefed, and it is happening. That's why you see him sometimes making those statements, not just in the speeches, addressing some of the most evolving issues and most dangerous issues. So he is being prepared to become a chief executive, and hopefully he'll be elected.
And last call, Melanie, Ventura, California, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing fine. Go right ahead.
My problem is that Mr. Trump has no knowledge of foreign affairs at all. And what's going on with Putin and Kremlin and his close ties to them. I have a concern about that, about the safety of America. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Keep going, Melanie.
I just cannot wrap my arms around this man who is selling out, who has business ties, personal business ties with Mr. Putin. And what is he going to do with the White House? He is our enemy. And yet his family members are hanging out with this family.
Got it, Melanie. Thank you, Melanie. Okay, we do get the point. I laid out a couple of different points there.
Thank you, Melanie. Actually, I do hear this all the time. These are the charges and the accusations. In fact, if you look at the fact, Mr. Trump does not have any massive interest in Russia, let alone with Mr. Putin himself. I mean, even if this is the case, he has been a businessman, and he has interests around the world, including in the Gulf, in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, but mostly in the United States. That is where he's coming from. He's the CEO of a major multinational corporation, but there is an aspect that citizens or viewers need to pay attention to. He has acted for 25 years in his capacity of the boss of this huge network, meeting with many public policy persons. He has met monarchs, presidents, prime ministers, ministers, members of various assemblies. So he has discussed with them politics way more his opponents before they actually come to the position of a president, of the candidate for the presidency of the United States. So I think he has the experience. He was not in government, so were many people who were the heads of the opposition. I mean, President Reagan was an actor, and then of course he had the experience of the governorship of California, which brought him later on. In contrast with President George Bush I, who was the head of the CIA. He came to the White House knowing almost every single detail about international crisis. And these are the choices that you're going to make. You may have more exposure, as Mrs. Clinton has, but the judgment when it comes to be briefed with regard to crisis as in Libya and Syria should give you food for thought.
Walid Phares is a Trump presidential campaign foreign policy advisor. Thank you as well for coming along this morning and sharing your thoughts on the campaign.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going